Welcome to another episode of Exploring Prosperity. My guest today is Dr. John Austin, head of school at Deerfield Academy and the lead author of A Framework for Schools, a document that asks a simple foundational question: what is a school's ultimate responsibility? If you care about education as one of the key long-term drivers of prosperity, something Ray Dalio has emphasized often, I think you'll find this conversation enlightening. Thanks so much for being with me and giving me your time today. Before we get into the framework itself, I'd love to start with you. Could you share a bit about your background and what drew you to Deerfield and how those experiences have shaped the way you think about the challenges facing schools today?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to have the chance to speak today. The moment where my kind of life trajectory changed was when my parents, looking at my public school report cards, which were abysmal, said that, I think we need to do something. And I ended up in boarding school at St. Andrew's School in Delaware. And that was just a pivotal moment in my kind of life. It was there that I kind of fell in love with learning. And that in turn launched me into a teaching career that resulted in me eventually ended up going back to teach at St. Andrew's. And as you said, becoming the head of school at King's Academy, which was just a wonderful opportunity for me. I landed there in June of 2010. And in 2 short months, the Arab Spring was in full swing. Syria had collapsed. Egypt had collapsed. The Gulf states were in a state of near civil war. And there was a great deal of concern throughout the region. And I had 9 incredible years leading King's with an amazing group of faculty. And then I ended up at Deerfield, and I should say, I had never been to Deerfield until I interviewed for the job, but I had always known it, and I had known it because I had met some of its graduates, but more importantly, I first encountered it my first year teaching when a dear mentor of mine gave me a copy of The Headmaster by John McPhee about Frank Boyden, who was head of school for 66 years. The book is actually sitting right there, and you can see it's
been read a few times.
It's been read a few times. It's got a rubber band around it, and that is actually the copy that my friend Tad Roach gave me, and the book stuck with me. It's just so powerful. And when Margarita announced her retirement,
that was your predecessor.
That was my predecessor here at Deerfield. She shot me a quick note letting me know that was happening.
She was head of school for my 4 children coming through.
Yeah, and she's wonderful, and she was amazing during my transition in. I decided, I think this could be a place where I could be happy and where I could be of service. And I was fortunate enough to be appointed, and it's a school that just speaks to a lot of the educational values that are most important to me. I feel like it's one of the few boarding schools in the United States that hasn't forgotten itself. And that's managed to stay true to its core values and its core mission.
I think it's been through strong leadership too.
It's had amazing leadership.
It really has. And Eric Widmer, it's interesting that you were only the 6th, but you knew Eric very well.
I knew Eric very well.
Margarita's predecessor.
And I succeeded Eric at King's Academy because Eric was the head there for the first 3 years. So in a certain sense, I've kind of twice succeeded Eric. First at King's and now at Deerfield. And you're right, that continuity of leadership at the head level, I think has been incredibly important to Deerfield's success. And I'd be remiss in not noting that that's true at the board level as well. And I talk about this often, but the continuity of leadership at the board level and at the head of school level has created conditions where the mission of this school has been stewarded with great care and intentionality. And it's been a school that's managed to both preserve its kind of educational DNA, but at the same time, it's always been a school that's been attentive to the future and attentive to future possibility. But that continuity of leadership has been unusual, and I think a remarkable factor in its tremendous success.
So when you arrived here taking the job, you came with a different perspective.
Yes.
And let's talk about some of the things that were going on in the independent school system at that time.
Yes.
It might be useful later.
When I arrived at Deerfield.
When you arrived at Deerfield. It
Yeah.
might be useful later to discuss a little bit about deeper history, if that
Yeah.
matters. But tell me what you saw and what caused you to write originally a speech for Parents' Day that eventually became this document.
Yeah. So I think it's important to note that I was out of the country essentially for a decade. I was coming back and forth, but I was leading a school in a different part of the world, in a very, very different context.
All of the students there were from the Middle East, or were there any Americans?
When I arrived, it was a predominantly Jordanian school with a smattering of kids from the region, outlying countries, and just a handful of kids from the local diplomatic community, including some Americans. Over the course of my 9 years, it diversified, internationally pretty dramatically. So by the time I left, we had kids from 45 different countries, and we had a kind of school year abroad-like program called Arabic Year that brought American students to Jordan to immerse themselves in the culture and to study Arabic intensively. So in some ways, the project was the translation of a school like Deerfield into the Middle East, but it was in a very, very different context. And one of the things I was able to do when I was over there is just see a tremendous number of international schools across the world, which was really eye-opening to me. But I had left behind for a while the American independent school landscape for basically a decade. And when I arrived back, I felt a bit like, Rip Van Winkle. I left during the regime of King George, and when I got back, George Washington was president, and things had changed. Like there had been a lot of changes in American independent school education, and what I would describe, and it took me some time to get my mind around this, but a bit of mission drift. When I made those remarks during Fall Family Weekend, first of all, I made them after COVID, and COVID was a huge challenge for every school. We made a decision fairly early into that in April of that first year of COVID to open school in the fall, which we did. And I think we did that well. That was a big challenge. Like the Arab Spring was a big challenge. I felt like I was kind of well prepared for that kind of crisis moment, but it was an engineering challenge, right? It was like, how do we reconfigure school life to get kids back on campus during a moment of pandemic, and how do we shape student life so that we can minimize spread of COVID and safely, conduct school for our kids. And we solved for that. the bigger challenge was just the political and cultural moment, and it was a centrifugal moment. You felt things pulling apart in different ways, and that was more challenging, I think. And my remarks to parents was, in a lot of ways, a response to that, and an attempt to kind of change the language and the story that we tell about school. I spent the summer of 21 thinking and reading and resetting, and doing some writing, and the result were those remarks that then got some attention and resulted in the grant from the Ford Foundation.
And so the challenges were a series of different ones. We can kind of throw them into three different categories. One, kind of external pressures, and then there were internal organizational pressures. And this wasn't just unique to Deerfield.
Yes.
This was across the board. And then there were the pressures among the students' body.
Yeah. What are you thinking of in terms of the external pressures?
There was much more media attention on independent schools.
Yes.
There was there were increasing numbers of lawsuits being filed.
Yes.
On elements of this part of society that had been kind of left alone because it was an independent organization of schools, or an independent effort to educate children, and then internally, I thought it was fascinating that all of these pressures are beginning to change the way boards were behaving, and the perception among board members of that, and what heads of school pressures were under. Talk a little bit about that, because the part of the framework in the beginning called Challenges made it so clear that there had to be something that could that would allow boards and heads of school and everybody to figure out what are the main priorities. What should we really be focused on when we have all these distractions and all these pressures pulling us apart?
I mean, you did a nice job of naming some of them. It was almost as if schools just found themselves in the line of fire in ways that they hadn't prior to that moment, in terms of some of the legal challenges and challenges from very outspoken and aggressive parent organizations, and from others who had all kinds of different thoughts about the mission of schools. And for me, the magic of an independent school is its independence, right, and its ability to chart its own mission. And one of my observations, when I got back here, is that a lot of schools and a lot of nonprofits had kind of lost a sense of mission under pressure from various kinds of constituencies. And one of the ways that manifested itself is that you got the sense that nonprofits and colleges and even independent schools were much more active as kind of political voices and political players. And for me, that came at the expense of the core foundational mission of schools, which is learning, right, and student flourishing. And the framework was an attempt to recenter things and to give schools some principles that they could use to think about, reflect on, and refocus kind of core values and core missions, and to think about those as furthering the educational mission of the school.
Well, and then the whole third category, I put them into these three categories, is the students. And you pointed out a whole series of problems that you state as problems, but it's pretty obvious that those problems stem from the external forces.
Yes.
That, when I was here, we didn't pay much attention to what was going on in the world. And I think that for somewhere over the last couple of decades, the outside world has seemed to intrude into independent schools much more, and making it much more challenging. But that was also probably the guiding force of the framework, which is let's center what the objective really should be, which is the intellectual capability of students upon graduation to handle the world and succeed and maneuver.
And the way in which there's always a tension with schools in terms of their inward focus on the work that the kids are doing on campus and the learning that's happening on campus and the activities on campus. And on the other hand, the world outside, and we don't want to be oblivious to that. We're preparing our kids to engage meaningfully with the world beyond. And we live during a moment now where that's where the world beyond our campus is in some ways right there on their screens. It's right there on their phones.
It's pretty easy to come to the conclusion that it's entering the campus because of the screens. We barely had television. And so it was very limited.
Unless you read the newspaper or had one of the three major networks on the TV, right? And now it's very, very different. Deerfield has pushed back against what I would call the screenification of schools in terms of how we approach. And we've tried to move in two different directions here. On the one hand, we've actively limited access to phones and asked kids to leave them in their rooms. On the other hand, we want to engage with kids about what's happening in the world. And it's my view that the best way to do that is through the curriculum, right? You have to embed, meaningful opportunities for discussion and dialogue within the actual curriculum itself. So on the one hand, the world is constantly pinging you, through the phones and the screens, and on the other hand, we want to keep that at some kind of distance so that we have time and space on campus to engage kids in disciplined conversations about important issues.
Well, and this gets to what the framework is all about and the three pillars. And I'll let you lead into that, because the challenges section was very clear that something had to happen. Otherwise, you're going to have a fragmentation, and the child will be the loser.
One of the great byproducts of COVID for me as a head of school was that it put me in touch with other heads of school, because it was a kind of crisis that required other heads to talk with one another and to share
ideas
and to figure out what was going on.
What are the priorities?
I had a couple different groups of heads of school that I spoke to weekly, and as I spoke to them, it was pretty clear that we all needed some principles to navigate our way through what was a moment of high conflict. COVID was really, really difficult to navigate. The political moment was really, really difficult to navigate. Different constituencies had different perspectives and had different views and different needs, and meeting all of those was really, really hard. Boards were getting, because of the nature of the crisis, because COVID was essentially about how and when to open school, boards were more involved in the minutiae of not the Deerfield board, because we developed a great plan, but many boards were involved in a level of detail, of operational detail, that was really kind of unprecedented. And so in all of my conversations with my colleagues, there was a need for principle. Like, how do we make sense of this? How do we establish some guidelines for schools to operate during this moment of intense high conflict? And that was how we arrived at the three pillars of the framework, around expressive freedom and nonpartisanship, and the one that's really important to me is intellectual diversity, and how you operationalize that on campus.
Well, let's start with the expressive freedom, because it's like the First Amendment to the Constitution, freedom of speech, which you do not use.
Yes.
And there's a difference between the two.
Yeah. So, that section of the framework is really trying to establish norms, not rules, not laws, but norms that support curiosity and inquiry, discussion, and dialogue. And the three dimensions of that, each of those is incredibly important. And it's my view that we need to actively teach the three kind of expressive norms that are embedded in the framework. We need to actively teach and intentionally teach conscientiousness of expression, toleration of expression, and courage of expression. That is to say, we need to figure out ways to foster thoughtfulness and care in how kids use language, particularly given the coarseness of the public dialogue, particularly through social media. And we need to absolutely encourage kids to find their own voices and to ask questions. And we have to inculcate in them the ability to listen to different perspectives and points of view, even when those challenge deeply held and deeply felt beliefs. And the reason we wanted to talk about norms rather than rules, and rather than fall back reflexively on kind of First Amendment dogma, is that if schools are successful in helping young people learn to use language well, to ask questions, and to use language in a way that's thoughtful and conscientious and sensitive to their audiences, I think we're going to graduate young men and women who can manage conflict and who can engage with people who think differently than themselves.
Well, there were two things in that section that struck me. One was there is a role for the goals of the institution itself in the expression of any one person. That's teachers or students.
Yes.
And the other one is the implied idea that the objective of freedom of expression is really to persuade.
Yes.
Or to be persuaded.
Yes.
And so, whereas the First Amendment kind of personifies that our country is built on individual rights and the government protecting those rights, that doesn't really apply to a small community where there's an objective for the students to graduate with some capabilities. I thought those were very interesting to not be stated overtly.
Yes.
But that seems to be the intention.
Yeah. Yeah,
Is that
one of the paradoxes of the framework is that it celebrates expressive freedom as I think it should. I'm kind of a Millian John Stuart Mill in my views in that way, but it's also a plea for a certain kind of restraint and a certain kind of ethos of responsibility. And that comes through when we talk about conscientiousness of expression.
Yeah.
That is to say, kids need to learn how to speak in a way where they understand the impact of their language and they shape it according to that. Faculty need to, and this was one of the things that was surprising to me when I got back from Jordan. Faculty also need to put the needs of their students first, and sometimes that means an ethic of restraint. And when I got back to the United States, I was struck by how many faculty saw their classrooms as platforms for the expression of their own enthusiasms or political views, and refreshingly frank about that as a goal. And I thought that gets things a little bit wrong, because I think the purpose of school and of the classroom is to encourage kids to express themselves, and sometimes our own voices can overwhelm that.
Well, in fact, it is persuasion, and you really don't want teachers to be persuading. You want teachers
Yes.
to be teaching the art of persuasion.
Yes.
There's a pretty important
Yes.
difference, I would think.
Yes.
Because in the persuasion, they are necessarily going to change the willingness of a student to be thinking other thoughts.
Yeah. And
Don't
also,
want to challenge the teacher who's giving me my grades.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think it's a really important obligation of a teacher and a school to create space for thinking, to create space for thoughtfulness, to create space for curiosity, and sometimes our own voices can get in the way of that. And
well, it's almost a certainty that our own. It's hard for anybody not to let that happen.
Yes.
And that kind of gets to this discipline, the discipline nonpartisanship,
Yes.
which is the second pillar.
Yeah.
And this is probably, we should spend a little time on this, because this also is a key part.
Yeah. And it's a tricky part, because it's sometimes misunderstood.
Yeah, and you specifically avoided the term neutrality.
We did, and the reason we did is because no school is neutral in terms of its values. I mean, Deerfield has values. The framework has values, and we should be unapologetic about what those are. But at the same time, it's one of the, for me, one of the in fact, the core of the framework is the idea that schools are first and foremost places of learning and inquiry, and not places of activism. And we need to be careful not to confuse the practice of politics with its study. And for me, schools should study politics. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to kids. They want to talk about it.
And learn about it, because there's a lot to be learned.
Yeah, they want to learn and think about it. And this has been a through line in my career. I mean, kids are fascinated, and as you said, and it's an important qualification, there's also a body of knowledge that helps them to think more carefully about politics as well. But the reason we landed on nonpartisanship is we wanted to emphasize that schools as institutions are not partisan in they're they're there to help young people learn and discover themselves. And neutrality is
what's interesting though is the document itself said this is just a philosophy.
Yes.
And
yes.
every school can use this or ignore this. And I actually did a search for how many independent schools use social activism in their mission.
Interesting.
And political involvement in their mission. And there are a lot of schools.
There are a lot of them.
God bless them.
Yes. And
I agree with that. That's the beauty of the independent school system. There are kids at a young age who want to learn how to be better political activists in their institutions, their schools that they can go to. That's fantastic. All this document is saying is, here's a vision that's shared by 9 other private schools that we think all schools should consider.
Yes, absolutely.
And accept what you want and reject what you want.
Yes.
But we're just trying to give a set of principles that we happen to believe in. And we're going to conduct our affairs this way. And that's all it is. It's a suggestion. As you pointed out earlier, it's a provocation. We're kind of like, let's make sure that people pay attention to these ideas and then go ahead and set whatever mission you want.
Yeah. And as you just so beautifully said, that's the virtue of American independent schools, that each of them has their own mission. And it's a pluralistic system, and different schools will move in different directions. And I completely agree with you that a school has a mission to, a social justice mission or a political activism mission. That's fine. Mm-hmm. Pursue it. Go after it. We're all going to be, better for that. I'm obviously a partisan of nonpartisanship. I'm a fan of the principles of the framework, and I think it's important, and I think young people will be best served if we can focus in a very intentional way on their learning.
I think this document is a tool for people to see it laid out in clear terms that makes it easier for people to agree with it.
Yes.
Because these are principles that a lot of people share anyway.
Yes.
But it wasn't compiled this way. It wasn't posed as, here's the problem, here's a version of a solution.
Yes.
Based on principles.
Yes.
Do what you want with it.
Yeah. We didn't write it as kind of the Chicago Statement, or as the Chicago Statement got operationalized as a document to be signed.
Yeah, you're speaking about the University of Chicago
the University of
in 1968, maybe. Somewhere in there.
Well, the Chicago Statement on Expressive Freedom is later. The Calvin Report was 67. That was on institutional neutrality. But there was a movement post 2020 among colleges and universities to have institutions, quote unquote, sign on to the Chicago Statement, sign on to those values. And that wasn't what we were hoping.
Yeah, this wasn't the intention.
Yeah, we were hoping, as you said, to provoke conversation and reflection. And I think it's been successful in that way.
So let's talk briefly about intellectual
yes.
Diversity as well, which is the third pillar.
Yeah. So the reason that in many ways for me sits at the core of the enterprise, because it takes us directly into the classroom space itself. I mean, there are lots of things that you can do programmatically beyond the classroom at a school to expose young people to different perspectives and points of view. And we've been doing that for the last 6 years and experimenting and exploring different ways to do that. And we've had some great dialogues and discussions on campus around various topics, particularly last year as we headed into the election. But the strength of the liberal arts tradition is that it's always valued a variety of perspectives. And I think if we're able to shape classroom experiences that allow students to look at a question or an issue and approach it from a variety of different perspectives or theoretical models or schools of thought, that's very empowering to kids to be able to see that adults can disagree, that they can bring different perspectives to the same question and come to different conclusions. And I think it's an absolutely critical component of a young person's education. They need to when they graduate from a school like Deerfield, they need to understand that. They need to know that people can think differently about different topics, and that there's a richness and a complexity to things that's really important.
Let's move on to the implementation of all of this.
Yeah.
At Deerfield, tell me about the process of acclimation to this whole framework.
Yes.
You got a good start because the parents heard the
Yes.
we call it the
Yeah.
the germ of it.
Yes.
And then the board probably was involved in your understanding at least that you were doing it. And,
Yeah.
and probably had some,
Yeah.
I assume they
Yeah.
approved of the ideas.
Yeah. Well,
And then what were how did you go about implementing it?
yeah, great. It's a great question. So, I offered the remarks in the fall of 2021, and I didn't share them with anybody before I did. I was quite literally writing them at this desk 5 minutes before I walked into the auditorium. And I thought a great deal about it. And they were very well received by parents. They were very, very well received by the board of trustees, and the board kind of formally endorsed the remarks and later the framework as important operating principles for Deerfield. I think there was a more mixed reaction from faculty. One of the things I did after those remarks in 2021 is I created a series of listening sessions that were open and voluntary, and I think I did 13 or 14 of them. And I think that was
For the whole community or for the faculty?
Just for the faculty.
Just for the faculty. Right.
And they could come or not come. And I think about 60% of the faculty ended up taking me up on that. And there was good conversation, and there was good pushback, and it was very clarifying.
Can I ask your opinion, your guess as to the 40% that didn't participate? Were those a majority that agreed with it, or a majority that disagreed with it? Could you tell?
I think it was probably. I think most of the people who disagreed with it showed up. Yeah. And I think a overwhelming majority of the folks who didn't come probably agreed with it and didn't feel like they needed to come and express that.
Could have gone either way.
Or they might, or they might have just been busy, right? I mean, it's, we're doing it. It was during this time of the year actually that I was doing it. But it was very clarifying, and it was good for me to hear back. And that's when I discovered that there was a debate and a discussion about fundamental issues about what is the purpose of school, and how do I conduct myself in my classroom during moments of high political conflict? Like, what is my job?
That's really actually, I mean, you would think that you'd need to train teachers on how to do that, because it's not evident. It's not at all evident.
No,
especially with the background of the idea of freedom of speech. I should be able to think what I want to think.
And there's a rich literature on this question of whether or not you should share your political views in the classroom.
By the way, that comes out in the document. It's a relatively quick read. It's very compelling. But you can tell that there's a deep history of philosophy going into each of these
Yes,
questions.
yes.
And each of the paragraphs and
Yeah.
sections, there's a lot behind it
Yeah.
that gets condensed into a handful of sentences.
Yeah, my director of communications, when she printed it, was wise enough to exclude the footnotes, of which there were like 124 or something absurd. But yeah, a lot of thought went into those. But my conversations with faculty raised important questions, and not everybody agreed. But it was an opportunity to reset. It was an opportunity to air those disagreements and to say clearly, there are different answers to some of these questions. But this is the direction that Deerfield will be moving. And I think it's important for institutions to have that kind of clarity.
And I suppose there's always a freedom to opt out. And if
yes,
you believe
there is.
in
Yes.
social activism
Yeah.
in the secondary school system,
Yeah.
then there are places that will
Yes. Yeah.
would love to have you.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that the framework doesn't place a blanket prohibition on faculty expressing their own political views in the classroom. It simply says that if you're going to do that, you need to do it in such a way that empowers young people. Right?
Encourage them to speak.
Yes. And that's a question of professional judgment. And I would defer to faculty on that. So I think that's an important
it's a
qualification.
good. It's very important that this is not a rule, as
Yes.
you pointed out early
Yes.
on. It's a
This
norm.
is about
It's
norms.
a guideline.
Yeah. And we are in a norm breaking moment, in a norm breaking age. And schools have always had powerful unspoken norms that shape professional conduct and student conduct and board conduct. And we are seeing those, today more than ever, challenged in all kinds of ways.
And with the students, so the faculty you had, eventually there's buy-in because the institution wants it. And with the kids, it was there were a lot of challenges for kids.
Yes.
And so what were the implementations? What was the response from the students? And how's it going? And what have you seen on people coming into the school? And how prepared are they when they leave? Relative to that, because you were early on the mobile phone.
Yeah, and even that the how Deerfield has managed screens is not obviously part of the framework, but it
addressed some of the challenges that you laid out.
Yes, and I think it's a critically important consideration for schools. I think if you want a school that's open to discussion, that's welcoming of different perspectives, you have to have very, very high levels of trust. And so the question then becomes, how do schools create trust? And it's my view that schools like Deerfield, have an extraordinary ability to deliver on that by virtue of the fact that they're boarding. And B, the way they need to do that is by encouraging face-to-face interaction and shared experiences with the kids, and getting the phones off the campus and into the kids' rooms, and creating opportunities for random kids to come together and eat dinner together, which has been an important part of Deerfield's traditions for a very, very long time, is a way in which we generate trust among the kids and among the kids and the faculty. Those micro interactions matter a great deal, and they create what the political scientist Robert Putnam calls social capital. And the more social capital you have, the more connection you have, the more face-to-face, meaningful interactions you can create among and between kids, the more trust you have. And the more trust you have is going to allow you to create an environment where kids are willing to explore ideas in an open-minded, honest, authentic way. And they're not going to be suspicious of one another. They're going to be open. And so an important part of our intellectual infrastructure at Deerfield Academy has to do with the way in which we organize social life. And that has to do with how we think about screens, how we think about AI, how we think about phones, how we think about sit-down meals, how we think about weekends, how we think about dorms. And my view is that it's a winning recipe. And boarding schools can do it uniquely well. And I'm very fortunate to have inherited a kind of social infrastructure at this school that allows us to do that.
Well, that's very true. Well, I only hope that schools pick this document up and take into consideration the philosophies that are laid out in it, because it really is a remarkable document, and I think it can set a lot of and it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be an independent school. Any schools,
I agree,
because it so obviously focuses on the quality of the education.
Yes,
that's being
and many schools have picked it up. And what's gratifying to me is that they've done so in many different ways. Virtually every head of school that I encounter, has said, thank you for doing that. I used it with our faculty at the beginning of the year to reset some of the things that we're doing, or I used it with our board of trustees to talk about some issues in governance. So I think it's really been widely used, and it's become an important vehicle of conversation, and we hope to build on it in the years to come.
Well, it's been great being back at Deerfield again.
Well, it's great to have you here, Bob. It's great to have
Thank
you
you
here.
so much for your time.
Thank you. That was fun. I appreciate it.
I believe the next generation can live better than any before it, but only if we stay curious, keep learning, and refuse to accept decline as inevitable. If that message resonates with you, please hit subscribe and share this video with someone who's curious as well. And if you'd like to go deeper, you'll find essays and research on my Substack. The link is below. Until next time, keep exploring.